Closed session for items 1 and 2. As to item 1, Councilmember Spriggs recused himself due to a potential conflict of interest based on the location of his residence. Direction was given by the rest of the council. No reportable action was taken. And item 2, direction was given. No reportable action was taken. Thank you.
Adjourn the closed session and call the regular meeting to order. This is a regular meeting of not just the City Council of Imperial Beach, but Public Finance Authority, the Housing Authority, and the Imperial Beach Redevelopment Agency successor agency. Madam Clerk, if you please take the roll.
Councilmember Bragg?
Here.
Councilmember Spriggs?
Here.
Councilmember Bilbray?
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Patton?
Here.
Mayor Janney?
Here. All please stand, join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Do we have any agenda changes for this evening? Not seeing any. Moving on to Mayor Council reimbursements, disclosures, and community announcements. Ms. Bragg.
I have nothing at this time.
Mrs. Spriggs.
Nothing at this time, Mr. Mayor.
Nothing at this time.
I'd just like to notice, there's a notice on the wall outside about our next meeting on the 5th of March, and including in that, we received Transnet funds from the Sandag for street, road, and sidewalk repairs, and there's a listing of proposed streets to be done. We'll be acting on that. That's something we have to do in order to expend the monies that come back to the city of Imperial Beach for street, road repairs. Mr. Hall, do you have anything for staff?
I just wanted to excuse Doug Bradley tonight. He is in a meeting of all the administrative services directors in the state. They're talking about their favorite agenda item, the Department of Finance, and the dissolution of redevelopment agencies.
So you're coming back this year or next year?
I don't know, maybe never.
Moving on to public comment, Mr. Boyd.
Good evening, Council, Mr. Mayor, city staff. My name is Marcus Boyd. Been at 1233 Palm Avenue as a business owner for about 12 years. I come to the council regularly. I ask for some sympathy, some compassion, some safe access. Today I come asking again for the same thing. But today I also bring with me Ismael Ortiz and also another gentleman named Mel, keep his last name private, as he's asked, and a cancer patient by the name of P.S. Johnny. All of these gentlemen are Hispanic, they're brown, and they're not represented on the council or in any management position in the city, nor have they been in the 50 years of the charter. Brown, Latino, youth, middle-aged are being stopped by the sheriffs, frisked, and if they have medical marijuana on them, if they have medical marijuana on them and a doctor's recommendation on them, they're being extended the maximum penalties by law as if it were illegal. It is happening in a disproportionate amount to brown people in this city. I hold in my hand something called a vape pen. It's a vaporizer. It's not an e-cigarette. It's a vaporizer. I hold in my other hand something readily available in the 30 or so dispensaries that are operating without license throughout the county. It's called an O-Pen. It's a disposable sativa blend concentrated cannabis. Mr. Ortiz was arrested less than a week, about a week ago, in in Imperial Beach, for possessing an empty O-pin on a felony charge. So he had to bail out in order for him to go to school the next day so he wouldn't be kicked out of school to be an accountant and also an aspiring actor. He has a demeanor and a look that immediately invokes suspicion, I guess, among some when he's not represented by them. So that equated to him losing his property of his recommendation. He lost his vape pen and his empty vial, and he lost his medical cannabis. He had about a gram on him. He was arrested for a felony.
Mr. Boyd, your time is up.
I apologize. I asked the council if for just a moment, please look into that. It's a problem.
Thank you. I have no further public comments. I'm going to move right on to our presentations. Mr. Hall?
Yeah, the first presentation would be and I'm making sure I didn't see Jim earlier. Oh, there he is. I'm sorry, you usually sit up here. They're making a presentation to you tonight about the climate understanding, about the resilience in the river valley. And I was going to turn it over to Jim for the introduction, but instead it looks like we have Danielle is going to introduce herself. So.
Yes. Hi, how are you all?
I apologize.
No worries. I'm Danielle Boudreau. I work for the Coastal Training Program at the Tijuana River Valley National Estuary Research Reserve. And I'm here to talk to you today about our project, Climate Understanding and Resilience in the River Valley, and just give you a quick update on where we're at in the process. So my presentation, I will quickly talk about the Tijuana River Valley, as I'm sure you're all familiar with. I will then talk about the CURVE project, which we like to refer to as Living with the Water, and then how we are responding to climate change, and then quickly just introduce you to some other regional efforts that are going on that we are either indirectly or directly affiliated with. So the Tijuana River Valley. This straddles the U.S.-Mexico border. The whole watershed, about 75%, is on the Mexico side, and it drains the Pacific Ocean through the Tijuana River Valley. The Tijuana River estuary is actually situated between two major metropolitan areas, San Diego and Imperial Beach, and then on the south side, Tijuana. It contains contiguous beach, dune, salt marsh, riparian, and upland ecosystems, and is one of the last remaining examples of Southern California coastal wetlands. The habitats are largely in public ownership. And the ecosystem management issues that we focus on at the reserve include sediment, trash, and sewage that cross over from Mexico onto the U.S. side, and then also invasive species, which is a pretty common issue among wetlands in the Southern California. So Living with the Water, the CURVE project. We are conducting a climate vulnerability assessment that will inform the development of a climate adaptation strategy. The planning area is primarily the Tijuana River Valley, and we are looking to develop a process framework that other regions can use and create a forum for science transfer among experts and among a broader stakeholder group. The primary focus of the vulnerability assessment is flooding and inundation from sea level rise, and then also riverine flooding. Now, how that relates to climate change is that if precipitation patterns change, our watershed inputs may change, and that could increase or decrease the amount of flooding and the type of flooding that we receive. The project timeline, we currently have a 3-year grant. We're funded by the NOAA Climate Program Office. And we spent most of 2013 doing scoping work, convening a project team, and are now moving into kind of more of the meat of the project, the vulnerability assessment. And later in the year, we'll move into developing the climate adaptation strategy and then move into implementation. Throughout the whole process, we're working hard to engage the stakeholders throughout the river valley. Our framework for stakeholder engagement is we have a CURVE steering committee that consists of the 8 public agencies that own or manage land throughout the river valley. We do have a representative from the City of Imperial Beach staff on the steering committee, Jim. And we also have a CURVE stakeholder working group, which is a larger contingency of anybody who has a direct interest in the future of the river valley or has an expertise that they can bring to the table, whether it be about climate adaptation or intimate knowledge of the communities in the area. And we also have City of Imperial Beach staff represented on that as well. And then we have our science and technical advisors, which we call on differently throughout the process. Early on, we were talking to a lot of hydrology modelers, and now we're probably going to move into more talking to public works and engineers as we actually think about the actual planning side of things. And then we're working closely with the Team One River Valley Recovery Team, which is a group of public agencies that's led by the Regional Water Quality Control Board. And their primary focus is the sediment and trash that comes across the border. And so since a lot of our strategies will overlap with the work that they do, we're working closely with them. So real quickly, just responding to climate change, what does this mean when I say climate adaptation and vulnerability assessment? This is the draft framework that we are working off of. You essentially organize, assess, plan, implement, and then monitor. As you saw in the earlier timeline, we spent most of our time organizing in 2013, and that essentially is getting project team stakeholders together, and then also identifying what the management sectors are. These were the management sectors that were identified by our stakeholders. We're focusing on both built infrastructure and the natural environment, trying to give equal weight to both. A lot of climate adaptation focuses on one or the other, but we feel that they're intricately connected and should be treated as a whole system. And now we're moving into the assess phase. So this is the framework for vulnerability assessment. What you do is you assess the exposure and sensitivity of a specific sector, and that will give you the potential impact that sea level rise or riverine flooding will have on that. And then you look at its adaptive capacity, and adaptive capacity could be the financial resources that are there, the technological resources that are there that may help that specific sector deal with the impact that they'll be facing. And then all that taken together will give you your vulnerability. Now, typically this is analyzed through two ways. You have your sea level rise or general flooding maps, and then you also do expert surveys. And we found that one big drawback of this is that the maps don't really give you everything you need. They show you where you might be wet, but they don't tell you whether it's going to be salt water or fresh water, how deep that water is, how long that water is going to be there, and that's a really big issue. So we decided in order to overcome that, we needed to have some scenarios. So we've been working on developing 4 different scenarios that we will run through the vulnerability assessment, which will give us different states of vulnerability. And then on top of that, we will plan adaptation strategies for those different states of vulnerability. And here's the framework for the scenarios that we are currently working from. There are basically two axes of uncertainties. There's the tidal prism, which tells you how far inland you're being affected by the tides, whether that will increase or decrease. And then there's also the extreme riverine flows, which can be changed by changes in management, or it can be affected by precipitation patterns changing. And so we got a group of geomorphologists, engineers, oceanographers, so on and so forth, to discuss how these different characteristics that are listed on the right side of the slide will be impacted in each of those 4 scenarios. And we're currently working on finishing up that report, and that will be out within the next month or so, outlining how in each of these 4 scenarios the river valley the physical landscape may look. Now, once we're through with this assessment phase, we will move into the planning phase, which I'm not going to talk about now because we haven't actually started it. But hopefully I'll be back and can update you at that point when we've moved further into the process. Now, just real quick, I'd like to just quickly point out a couple other regional efforts that are going on that are really integral to what we're doing here. There's what's called the Flood Resilient Infrastructure and Sustainable Environments, also known as the Flood Rise Project, that's coming out of University of California, Irvine, and that's recently been funded by the National Science Foundation. What they're looking at, we've been chosen as one of 2 sites, the other one is Newport Beach. And what they're looking at is analyzing risk perception among communities and how they can make hydrology models more effective in communicating someone's risk to flooding. And so that has actually just kicked off in October, and we will be helping out with that. Then there's also, as you all know, the Imperial Beach Sea Level Rise Adaptation Strategy, which was just funded by the Coastal Conservancy's Climate Ready grant. which will help you all plan on your Pacific Ocean shoreline for sea level rise. There's then the San Diego County Hazard Mitigation Plan update, which ICLEI and the San Diego Foundation are working to help integrate climate change into their update so that most hazard mitigation is, they plan based on what has happened in the past, and now a new model is coming up where now you have to consider what may happen in the future because it could change. And then the final project is temporal investigations of marsh ecosystems. And that essentially is, we've been funded by the Near Science Collaborative to look at how the past, present, and future may inform wetland restoration. And so that part of that is a historical ecology study, which will take historical maps of the region to show us what this place used to look like. And so that is it. Thank you. Do you have any questions?
I'm going to start off with one question. You mentioned that the Tijuana River Valley down here is a unique coastal wetlands area. Is that much different than the ones up in North San Diego County? Physically, I know I'm closer to this one here, and I've driven over the other ones and all that, but when you look at it from a scientific standpoint, are we considered a different resource as far as that, and why?
Yeah, so, in broad terms, yes, it is very different, and the main reason we are so unique and different down here is that we are contiguously connected, meaning all the ecosystems. You have the beach to the dune to the salt marsh to the riparian and so on and so forth up into the uplands. Up in North County, they do not have that. And then also because we've been protected for so many decades, a lot of what we have is original and a unique resource, whereas as you get further up the county, they're restored, and that affects its overall functionality and what resources are there. And then also, just to what makes us really unique is the amount of migratory species, bird species that we have going through
I
here.
was talking more on what you explained to me, but
Yeah, the
thank you very
habitats.
much.
Yeah. Mhm.
Okay, thank you. Do we have any other questions for Danielle?
I do. I always hear like, we have the second largest or the largest. How do we rate compared to the nation, size-wise of this estuary?
Yeah, so the nation, I'm not sure about the nation. And the reason, in California, we're probably, if you look at all of California, it's probably not necessarily an impressive size. But the unique thing about us is that in Southern California, we've lost about 90% of our wetlands. And our ecosystem is so different from what they have in Central and Northern California that we're pretty much the last remaining example of this type of wetland system. So that's a really special thing to have right next door. In terms of the country, I'm sure the Southeast has us beat because they're just one huge wetland, and they haven't had the level of development we've had, which means that a lot of our wetlands unfortunately have been lost permanently.
See a lot of hard work, especially on your plans, A's, B's, C's.
Yes.
A lot of different scenarios that you need to develop as well as find a solution.
Yeah, and we made a hard line that we weren't going to do more than 4 scenarios because the scientists are always, 100. And I said, well, planners can't do much with 100 different scenarios. We really got to focus in on what the real issue is. Yeah.
Good work.
Yeah, the scientists, because I work around a lot of them at UCSD, are all about the theoretical
Yes.
aspects, and we need applied science very much in the situation. Thank you for the report. Very good presentation. Could you tell us again, I have a couple of questions. Could you tell us a little about the timing of the phases and when there will be some outcomes that we can look forward to hearing about?
Yeah, sure. So as I said, our scenarios report will be coming out within the next month, and I believe, I'll double check, I believe that we've added you all to our stakeholder list, so hopefully you'll be able to get that online, this report. And then once that scenarios report is out, we will be doing an actual vulnerability assessment, which we will be having experts come together to use those scenarios to actually tell us what's vulnerable and what's at risk. I would say that report you're looking probably around fall. And then the really good stuff, which I know everyone's really wants to get to the planning and the climate adaptation, that you're probably looking early 2015 will be the actual development and finalization of some strategies. And then we'll hopefully move into implementation.
I was I was wondering, since we are a public body representing a city that is probably as strong a stakeholder in your work as anyone, whether appropriate for, or whether there have been any planned open discussions about the findings, perhaps in a workshop, once we start seeing some results, or perhaps maybe with the Thailand's Advisory Committee or something like that. So there's some public opportunity to actually engage with you as opposed to you're presenting and we're asking you questions.
Yeah. So we definitely have been, we've been doing kind of just public updates for meetings like this, and the T1 recovery team also has public meetings. But we are hoping, or as we get further along and there's actually some more meat to our results, that we will in some way engage through whether, we'd be happy to take recommendations through Jim or you folks if you think there's a specific committee or meeting that would be most appropriate to engage the public in actually commenting on what types of strategies are developed.
So moving on with what Mr. Spriggs read, perhaps in the fall, because it sounds like by the fall you could have gone quite a ways before you get into this real meat.
Yeah.
Maybe we'll have Jim bring you back and talk to us a little bit again and just keep an eye, so we can keep it on our radar screen.
Yeah, that would be great. And I'm definitely, after we get the vulnerability assessment done, there will definitely be some interesting results to share, I'm sure.
See, one other point that goes, well, it has gone without saying, that's that we are, I think as a community, very interested, obviously, in the estuary and its well-being, and in many aspects of it, including the water quality and that sort of thing. But also in it being a viable tourist attraction, as well as a refuge for endangered species and other wildlife. There's lots of interest that we have in it. So I just wanted to mention that to you because it's a very multidimensional set of interests, and that's why I think ID is probably as deeply interested in this as any city or any community that you might work with around a study like this.
Yeah, and I think that's great that you put that up. The management sectors I had put up, one that is really important to us is parks and recreation. I mean, we obviously are there to have trails and have visitors. So that there will be a specific vulnerability assessment that's going to specifically look at the trails and make sure that we still have that access to our resources.
Thank you very much, and I'd also like to commend you on working with so many different agencies. I see several from California and NOAA's and even local ones, so I think you do a lot with what we've got down here. So we'd like to keep it forward.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you.
Moving on to consent calendar items 2.1 through 2.3. Would entertain a motion to adopt. A motion and a second. Could we please vote?
Mr. Mayor, can we have an oral vote, please?
We sure can. All in favor? Aye. Any nays? Any abstentions? Thank you.
Motion carried unanimously.
Moving on to reports. Mr. Hall, item 5.1, the Sports Park Task Force report.
Mayor and Council, it's my lucky pleasure to be here tonight to talk about what has been happening on the Recreation Task Force. I do see some members in the audience from the task force. Mr. Don Spicer, the first time I've ever seen him without a hat on. Candy Unger is also here tonight. Greg Wade sat on the task force, as well as Councilman Bill Bray and Councilman Patton. A few members that weren't able to make it tonight. I don't see Jim Lacone or Jim King. Ken Blisman was not on the task force, but certainly very involved in what we are looking at with our recreation. But I just wanted to give you a little bit of history. I think most of you know a little bit about it, but initially the role of the task force was to review the proposals that were submitted in response to a request for proposal that was put together by this body. We anticipated getting at least 2 proposals, initially one from the YMCA and one from the Boys and Girls Club. The way it turned out, essentially, is that only 1 proposal was submitted, and so the role of the task force changed a little bit, and the review of the Boys and Girls proposal was changed a little bit. It wasn't in comparison with another proposal, but rather what we would like to see happen with our recreation program. And in some discussions with the Boys and Girls Club who submitted a proposal and the Little League, Girls Softball, and the task force, to make a rather long and arduous many meetings story a little bit shorter, essentially we boiled our options down to really 4 viable options that we were looking at. Anytime the city council's looking at options, we certainly have to start with the do nothing option. That was one of the options, was to keep things the way they are. But the council had made a clear decision that they would like to see the recreation program enhanced, new programs introduced, and maybe some different opportunities provided to the residents of the community. So probably the do nothing option was dismissed pretty quickly. The next option we looked at was perhaps to just take the proposal of the Boys and Girls Club and just implement that the way that it was proposed. I had a chance to sit down and talk with Mr. Blinsman and what their goals are for the Boys and Girls Club and moving forward. I also had a chance to sit down with the Little League and Girls Softball and talk with them a little bit about what they're trying to accomplish as groups. And it became apparent that the third option, which is being presented to you tonight, would be to separate the sports park complex into essentially 2 pieces. The fields where the Little League and the Girls Softball operate their games, and the other facilities on the site, which include the recreation center, the skate park, the tot lot, parking lot, some of the landscaping, essentially separate those into 2 areas and have an agreement to have the Boys and Girls Club operate the non-field space at the sports park, and to have and then to have the council enter into a separate agreement with the Little League to operate the Little League and Girls Softball fields. And then the fourth option that we talked about is perhaps enhancing and growing our own professional staff and maybe having the city continue to provide the recreation program. After reviewing those options, and I think more than anything looking at the current circumstances of the community where we're at, looking at a summer season moving forward, the task force, which I've been asked to speak for, which is different than your subcommittee made up of 2 council members, but the task force certainly came to a consensus that the best opportunity we have right now in at least the next 18 months before we prepare our next budget cycle would be to have the Boys and Girls Club operate the non-field space and to enter into an agreement with the Little League to maintain and program the field space, and that the $50,000 that would be provided by the city, according to the request for proposals, would be used to first pay the electricity and the water for the entire facility, not just the fields, but for the recreation center as well. And any money that is left over from that, if there is any money left over, would be to maintain the site, to continue to do maintenance on the site. It may be replacing minor things and whatnot. So we brought together the Little League and we brought together the Boys and Girls Club and we talked about that scenario together. And I think that they both felt comfortable moving in that direction. And so that was the consensus reached by the task force. One thing I'll say is that the most important thing that we all discussed, and I think it's consistent with what the city council was hoping for, is that we have a real opportunity to see some healing in our community. This was an issue that was a little contentious, but I think a lot of it is because we're all very emotional when we start talking about the youth in our community and the opportunities to make sure that everybody has access and a chance to participate in some of these programs that we offer in our community. So certainly the emotion was understood and appropriate. But what we want to do now is come together and make sure that we're building a recreation program that really benefits the entire community. I should state, for all full disclosure, in the meeting I did express to them that I have had an opportunity once before to build a professional staff. I think that may be a viable option, but I think right now what we want to take a look at is the here and now, what we're doing. That gives us all some time to see if this is the best scenario, if it's the best scenario, I say we move forward and we stick with it. And believe me, I just hope that this is just a smashing success and we just go forward into the future. But by the same token, what we agreed is this isn't written in stone. We can monitor, we can adjust. The bottom line is we want to have a great recreation program for our residents, find ways to expand that, maybe even expand it to some classic Southern California activities that are more beach oriented, whether that's surfing, or sailing, or some of those things that are really appropriate in our beach community. So part of the reason we wanted to come here tonight is that's a large departure of where we started. And we started out with a task force that was going to review 2 competing proposals, and that's just not the way it turned out. But before we go too far, and before we now engage legal counsel in preparing these agreements, we certainly thought it was appropriate for us to approach the city council, make sure we get any of the thoughts that you have, and then move forward to prepare those contracts. And again, that's the report from the task force. Your subcommittee may have some additional comments, and then I would guess that if you have any questions for members of the task force, they could answer those. Or if I've misspoken, I believe I've given a good summary of what's happened in those meetings. But with that, Mayor, I'll turn it over to you.
Well, I'd like to ask specifically, say what they both task forces. Do you have any comments?
Well, it was a pleasure working with everybody involved. I think all parties acted in good faith. The Boys and Girls Club and softball, Little League, all the meetings went very well. Everybody wanted this to succeed. It's great for our community, and I believe that all the parties involved are fully capable of doing this and handling this big challenge. They must succeed, and I believe they will succeed. And we're behind them 100%. And this has to be a win-win-win-win-win-win situation. And I think it is. I really feel that when a big group like this can walk out of the room all in agreement, something was done right. And I think for the time being, this is the best thing possible for our city and for our kids and for our Little League and for the Boys and Girls Club and for the adults and seniors and people that want to use that facility. So I'm pleased with where we're at right now.
Over.
I think Mr. Patton summed it up pretty much best. I'd love to say that, I was in there, pushing for things, but really it was just Mr. Hall, Greg, and the task force really just came together. And I sat back and listened and put in my 2 cents when I needed to put it in, but for the most part, it was city staff and the task force that came to this agreement. And I really think it's something that we can really be proud of, that we've had the public input and we've come to this conclusion. And everybody's in agreement. Thank you.
So thank you. So really, this was an information item this evening, Mr. Hall. So basically, you were informing us of where we are. So I take it with this discussion, we're just assuming you're going to move forward with what you've outlined for us to get, I guess in this case, legal, and then having people like Mr. Spicer or Mr. Blissman sign on a dotted line someplace. Somebody's going to sign in something. So, Mr. Briggs, do you have something?
Nothing really to add, other than I'm really, really glad this is working out in a satisfactory way for everybody involved. This was one of the worst, most contentious time periods in recent years in our town, and I'm glad to hear everybody's coming together around a solution. I haven't heard much about and I know the specifics are yet to be worked out, but there's a basic outline, and I really heard it first in very brief form from you. Could you outline again what the points are? I don't want to belabor it, but I'd like to understand the basic points of agreement. You don't have to go through the 4 options, but just focus on the one that was adopted, and how long it's supposed to be in effect, and I'm not quite sure I understood where the 50,000 was coming in, but please describe that. And a little bit about what's assumed the other facilities are going to be used for. Originally, we had these high hopes that we were going to be able to get adult programs and youth programs, not baseball or softball, but other kinds of youth programs, and there would be some kind of improved oversight at the skate park and a variety of things. I don't know whether you're in a position to talk about highlight the different elements that are supposed to be in the non-ball field parts of it. And as far as the ball field parks, what the basic terms of that are, that part of it is, and whether this is exclusive use of the leagues or whether there's shared use with other people able to access those facilities and that sort of thing. So just some highlights on those things, and I apologize for not being more informed for this first I've heard of it.
Yeah, you don't need to apologize for not being informed because you haven't been, and that's fair enough. This agreement will be coming back to the council. What we were really coming for tonight is this is a different concept that was originally conceived by the council when we started. So before we actually iron out some of the details that you're talking about, we wanted to make sure at a conceptual level that the council is comfortable moving forward in this direction. But to give you an overview, which I think we went through pretty quick, to give you a quick overview once again, essentially what we're going to have is an agreement with the Boys and Girls Club to operate all of the sports park facility except for the fields. Those fields will be under the shepherding of the Little League. And one of the things that we wanted to make sure is that the Little League and the girls softball were one and the same. At this point, Little League probably is a little bit more organized to have some additional volunteer help that the girls softball don't have at this current time. So what we wanted to do is make sure that the girls softball fields would be maintained at the same level and programmed at the same level as the Little League fields. And so they've agreed to work together as one. And so essentially what we're doing is, rather than having the Little League basically would like a little bit more say in when the fields are programmed for games, who's playing on them at night, when they can work on their infield, when they can strike the fields, and some of those kinds of things. But one of the things that has been made very clear is that when there are not games scheduled, we want to make sure that these are still open to the public. So a lot of those things that you raised in your questions have been discussed. What we'd like to do now is put them actually in agreement form, which will include, by the way, Mr. Blinsman has offered to and has provided us with a very comprehensive list of the programs they intend to offer. As you know, right now, the Recreation Center essentially caters to the teenage population, if you will, and the Boys and Girls Club essentially are the younger kids. I think that there would be some hope that there would still be some separations in those groups. They simply have different activities and different things that they'll be doing. And so the other thing is that Mr. Blinsman would like to extend some of the programs that they have in their other facility, basketball programs and some of those things. So we'll come back with a comprehensive list of the program expansions that we don't offer at the current time and a little bit more detail. And we will also come back with a very descriptive use of that $50,000. You brought that up. In general concept, though, initially that was to make sure that there would be no cost associated with the use of the fields to the Little League and the girls softball. By their own suggestion, the Little League said, well, you know what, we should really use that $50,000 to pay for the electrical costs and the water costs for all of the sports park first. Then if there's money left over, we can do some enhancing of the fields. I thought that was just a good offer on their part. They want to make sure that the Boys and Girls Club is also very successful. I think that they have a strong partnership and want to maintain that. But again, those are general concepts, but we didn't want to get too far into negotiations or into a final agreement without coming to the council with which is essentially a completely different concept than what you were envisioning when all of this started. So we didn't want to go too far without coming back to you with a report.
The last thing I asked is this proposed for a period of time, or is it open-ended? Or?
One of the things we discussed as a task force, in which we recommended to you when we come forward, we'd like to get the funding and the cycling of the agreements consistent with the municipal budget on the 2-year budget cycle. And so essentially, by the time we bring this back to you and by the time you adopt something, we're probably looking at 14 or 15 months on this first cycle. And then as we start to prepare the budget, we'll take a look, we'll monitor how things are going, whether or not it's consistent with what's in the agreement, or whether or not a change needs to be made, whether or not the agreements need to be tightened up, whether we need to go a different direction. But essentially what we want to do is bring it on the budget cycle, a lot like the CIP, to kind of bring things together when we're trying to talk about where we're going to use our resources, both financially and our staff resources, so that the budget, the CIP, and agreements like this have some cohesion, and we can tie together. So the council's seeing the complete picture of the city when you're making budgetary decisions instead of hit and miss as these things come up throughout the year. You bet.
Thank you. First off, I'd like to thank my colleagues for serving on that committee and the members in the community that did so as well. We have come a long way on this issue from where we were previously. Our recreation needs were community driven. I hope that they are community proven. And what I would like to see, Mr. Blinsman, when this all comes forward to us again, is programs, the list of programs being offered, fee schedule also included with that, and the scope of it. You know, we serve, like you said, Mr. Hall, we serve our teenagers, we serve our youngsters, but also including our senior population. And then, well, one of the ideas was, of course, collaborating with the school district as far as use of the swimming pool. I still hope that's an option. Maybe not today, but certainly in the future. Maybe there's a member of the audience who serves on our school board. That's always been, it's always been a request of our community as well. So, thank you.
Well, Ms. Hall, I hope you got enough feedback from that. I think that between Mr. Spicer and the Little League folks, the youth that use the fields out there, will work out real well for you for the next however many terms, our next budget cycle. We discuss this again. And then Ken and the folks from your team, I'm sure that, I know you provide great facilities and efforts for the real young youth of our community. Hopefully you're going to be able to reach out to the next generations, move it up a little bit, because I think they're ones that I think can really help a lot too, Ken. So hopefully you'll be doing good on that. So thank you very much. Moving on to, we have no action on that particular item, so moving on to item 5.2, Mr. Hall.
While our technical expert moves forward and pulls up a presentation, because I can't talk without a PowerPoint. And I don't know what happened to the little clicker. Is it somewhere?
It's up here.
No, because I never had it. Oh, okay. I can't even go now. Unless I do it. I will. Mayor and Council, to get started on this while they're pulling that out, what you had asked us to do is to come back with a little bit more detail on our CIP and be able to talk to you about exactly what kind of funding we would need right now to move forward with some of these projects, as well as how we would move forward with some of the multi-year projects. And so this is kind of the follow-up from our last meeting. One of the things that I wanted to do was to remind you that typically our major maintenance projects, you fund those fully, at least the high priority ones, so I have skipped those because essentially those are things that have to be done in order to maintain our infrastructure properly. And I focused more on the capital projects that are more discretionary for the City Council. The first one is Bikeway Village, and the only update I would have on Bikeway Village is that The bond proceeds from the RDA bond have already been allocated to this project, but the project will be coming before the City Council for final approval in your capacity as the Planning Commission. So you will see the project at a future date. We don't have anything to show you at this point because the project is not ready for public discussion. Likewise, on 9th and Palm, that project is entitled, you're very familiar with that, and again, the redevelopment bond proceeds have already been identified for that project. The ecotourism infrastructure, we want to give you a little bit of an update on what that means. That's a big fancy word for, and we use even bigger, fancier words like wayfinding and placemaking, and people kind of go cross-eyed about what that is. So talked to Hank, and he said, well, what I really want to do is I want to put together a sign program, something like this. And I said, Hank, that's just not going to work. That people don't know what wrong way, can't go any direction. And so I said, why don't we try maybe something like this that help people get around town. And this is one from the city of Ukiah, but certainly with our own flavor of helping people get around the community. Although we're all familiar with the community, when you drive through, it's not always intuitive how to get to the beach, especially if you're on 75 and some of those things. So we need to help people get there. And then I saw another one, and there could be any number of these things, and art and other things that help people find places in our community. But one that I found that might be appropriate in our community is if we were to go out to the Bayshore Bikeway and even paint some symbols on there like restaurant or a place to go get a soda or something, and help people when they're riding around say, oh, so if I go down this road, there's going to be a place where I can grab a bite to eat or something. So any of these way-making and place-finding places that we can encourage and help our businesses. So that's what we're talking about with some of those, and certainly finding the estuary and some of those things. There's really no discussion at this point to have on the revolving loan fund because, again, we're going to bring back to you a program dealing with the revolving loan fund in the near future. The regional communication system we talked about, we are now members of that regional communication system. We'll bring forward a resolution when we know what the final costs are associated with that project. Technology upgrade, as you read in your staff report, one of the things that we've asked is that we will form an internal subcommittee of staff members so that we know what the building department needs, what the fire department needs and whatnot, so that we can bring forward to you a package of the technology updates that we need in the community. The alley improvements, I'll move right into this. We have created a policy 616, which is our capital improvements program. Some of those capital improvement projects are going to last for several years, and so we felt like we needed to have some sub-policies to help you establish, for you to establish priorities, to help us put together projects and bring them forward to you that are consistent with some policies. So the one that we've prepared for alley improvements, and the one that we'd like to consider as policy 616A would be when and if the council moves forward on paving policies, these would be the priorities established for choosing those alleys that would be paved. By the way, from top to bottom being the highest priority is what we're suggesting. The council may have some changes to this, but first, an unpaved alley that inhibits the timely and effective provision of public safety services, including police, fire, and ambulatory services. An unpaved alley that causes or could cause damage to an existing public infrastructure system. And then the third one there being an unpaved alley that inhibits safe and sanitary primary access to an existing residence. So those first three are very much community benefit. As we move down, it would be an alley that presents a significant negative aesthetic impact that could result in lower property values in the surrounding area or in the general community. An unpaved alley that could improve circulation pattern of a neighborhood. An unpaved alley that is used for secondary access. And then a currently paved alley that is in severe disrepair, or a paved alley that is in need of repair. So you can see there we tried to establish a set of priorities for how we would choose to use the limited resources that we have to pave the alleys in the community. Another project that was brought before you was I'm sorry.
Didn't you add something to that policy about department heads choosing the alleyways also?
I did. I didn't have it on here, but you're right. That policy, essentially how we would choose those alleys, if it's within your policy, and that's a good point. I just put up the priorities, but essentially how these would be chosen is that the community development director, the public safety director, and the public works director would view all of the unpaved alleys in the community and apply this criteria, and then bring forward to you the alleys that most closely meet these high priorities, and then we would stay within the funding mechanism that the city council has allocated. For instance, what we are proposing in the first phase of the alleys is $50,000 to do engineering and $450,000 to actually implement some of these priorities. And so they would come forward to you with a project using these to prioritize those alleys. Hopefully, as objectively as possible, trying to remove, of course, all the subjectivity and whatnot, and make sure that we're looking at objective standards for when we would pave alleys. But that's a good point. That's how that would be selected and brought forward to the council. Yes.
Mr. Hall, I would like to really thank you on that particular item, because that was something that I had asked. And I think it's very beneficial for not only this council, but councils in the future. That's the criteria that was established. And that was something that I had asked, and for the community as well, what our benchmark points were in the selection process. So thank you for that.
You bet. And that reminds me, one other thing that's in that policy that's not on the screen is that if a group of residents choose to move forward and fund an alley on their own, the city council could say, okay, if a group of residents want to do that, they could elevate that higher on this priority list and say, let's do that alley since the residents are willing to participate. And it gives you that flexibility should that happen in the future.
And that's not necessarily 100% participation. It just be that they're adding value to the project.
Correct. You could consider that, absolutely.
And then the second thing, while we're on the alley, there was the discussion on the asphalt versus concrete. We might get more bang for our buck with asphalt.
That's correct. And one of the things we're finding out, and Hank may have more specific discussion on this, there are times when you want to have concrete alleys, but there are a lot of times where we could do pavement, asphalt paved alleys that will last just as long, will still accomplish the same task, and even though they require some maintenance, that maintenance is spread out over a period of many decades, and when you do maintenance, it's a little bit cheaper to do the maintenance. And so what we would look at is the most cost-effective way to do an alley. And there's going to be a lot of factors in that, but what we want to do is bring back to you projects that allow us to stretch those very limited resources as far as we can and get as many alleys done as we possibly can with the limited resources that we have. That's a good point.
I mean, because we're on the alley, when do you have any other questions?
I just had it. I've known a lot of people that lived on properties that had alleys, and sometimes I've heard them say, I wish there wasn't an alley. And collectively, a lot of people feel like if the alley wasn't there, they think their yard could be bigger. Are there any alleys in town that would fall in that category?
That's a great suggestion. One of the things that we should be looking at is whether or not there are alleys that do not provide access that would be better vacated and given to the underlying property owners, because they would never either be used for access, or maybe that just simply helps people have more property. So I think that should be part of our program. It's not written in there now, but I think that's a great suggestion that we add to that. If there are alleys that could or should be vacated, that we bring that to the city council for consideration as well. Yeah, that's a great suggestion.
Any other thoughts on this one before Mr. Hall moves on to the board? I mean, just for what Mr. Patton brought up here, I do remember many years ago that there was a project in town. We did give up a little bit of the alley to service one home. So it's not like we have history of being able to do that, so I think that's a good idea.
Hank or Greg, any good with the alleys? Okay, good. Moving forward then to Elm Avenue enhancements, this is another project that City Council wanted a little bit more information on, partially because there have been some neighborhood meetings, there's been some discussions from the neighborhood, but at this point in time, even though it's a high priority project for the City Council, we have not briefed the City Council at all in regard to the Elm Avenue enhancements. And so one of the things that we have prepared, should you want to see that, is we've prepared at least some basic information of what's happening, and I think I tried to share that with most of the council members in some briefings that we did previous to the meeting. But what we're seeking tonight is not approval of the Elm Avenue project, because you don't have enough information to make that decision. What we'd like to see tonight is an allocation of $40,000 that we could use to pre-engineer the project to the point where you could make a well-informed decision. What you have right now is a lot of concepts. And what we'd like to do is tighten those up a little bit. Concepts are only good if we make sure that the engineering, they can, that the storm drainage flows and all those kinds of things can work before we present a concept that engineering-wise doesn't work. And so we modified that. As you know, what we asked for before was the full $300,000 for the aesthetic portion of the street. What we're asking for now is for $40,000 so we can complete some pre-engineering and give you a better idea of what would happen on Elm Avenue. We did put up, and part of the reason that this has been a challenge to show you is this was a concept from some of the neighborhood meetings. And so it's kind of hard to put electronically. We do have a series of slides should the council want to see that. But essentially it gives you an idea of what we're trying to accomplish on Elm Avenue. But again, tonight what we're seeking is some funding to go out and do some additional pre-engineering so that you have a better idea what's happening there. Seacoast Drive aesthetics, that remains unchanged. We have a very detailed plan of the Seacoast Drive aesthetics project, and so this would fund the next phase of that, and the city council, we would bring forward a project for the city council's consideration in the near future. There you go. Just what I said. The demonstration roundabout, this provides the additional funding that is necessary to carry out the demonstration project. There's no change in that, and I think the council's aware of that project. We talked about the new park. There's really no update. That's money to develop a concept. Moving to the lighting project, this is the second sub-policy that we prepared for the city council on how we would move forward and prioritize areas of the community for lighting. And I should point out before Councilman Bray has to correct me again, essentially in your policy, the public safety director and the public works director would sit down and apply this criteria to where it would make the most sense to put together a project for your considerations. And that criteria would be the locations having the lowest density of existing streetlights, locations with a comparatively high number of public safety calls for service, locations where it's determined that additional lighting can significantly improve safety and security, locations where a lighting project can be done in the most economically efficient manner, and then also where locations and street lighting can be coordinated with other public improvements such as street projects and other things that are happening. So they would apply that criteria. They would come forward to the council and say, you know, essentially with the money that's been allocated, this is a project that we could tackle. Staff is suggesting that we allocate $150,000 to the street lights in the areas of the community that meet this selection criteria. If there's no, there's no right.
Thank you. Are these in chronological order of importance as well? Just like,
the intent was to have a prioritized order. That's correct.
okay. Because I'm kind of wondering about item D. I mean, that's it's kind of low on the spectrum, but I'd like maybe to elevate that because certainly if we're doing a project, there's a light efficiency in that project. I don't want it to be just at the low end of the scale, but it wouldn't be considered.
Which item are we talking about, Ms. Gregg?
D, on sub-policy 6163.
I don't see a D on mine, that's what I'm trying to figure it out.
Hey, top of page 3 of 6.
Is it 4 on mine?
Yeah.
Okay. Right. Locations where lighting project can be completed in the most economically efficient manner. Is that the one?
Mm-hmm.
Makes sense. We can make that modification. You know, I will say on the streetlights,
We're adopting resolutions that have these policies, so we need to keep track of it for modifying something before we adopt a resolution. So
correct.
Let's make sure that we're all in agreement with making those changes, because as we go through the resolutions, we'll take them separately. But that was, we were asking to move item 4 on mine, D on yours, from where to where?
Well, it's so low on the spectrum, I would,
I have a suggestion.
okay.
We can start.
My suggestion is that 3 is really a very vague version of 2, because the evidence for 3, lighting can significantly improve safety and security of the area. Safety and security, one clear indicator is going to be the number of public safety calls for service. I guess another one might be if there are any nighttime accidents that are higher in that area than other places. I would probably add that to number 2 and possibly drop number 3, moving forward to the 3rd place.
That might be even easier than having this brag and move one up, we'll just eliminate it, so it doesn't do right. It's not an easy thing. So what you recommended, Mr. Spriggs, is to add a couple more words to 2 and take out number 3?
Correct. And what I would add would be instead of, in addition to public safety calls for service, probably something like, or other indications of unsafe conditions, i.e. accidents.
Yeah, in fact, we actually have numbers for nighttime accidents, nighttime activity. So, and you mentioned nighttime, so we could add that.
Jennifer, were you able to get that? Okay. I just want to keep us track so that we'll move it forward there. On the same item, do we have any more comments? Starting with Ms. Bragg, Mr. Spriggs, do you have any more? Or?
My general comment is, I think this is, like the other one, very good to have these criteria and have very specific criteria. The vaguer the criteria, the more it's going to be, one neighbor saying my street light should have priority over that street light. I mean, we're going to get some of that anyway. It's natural if people really want something, they're going to make the case, which is right. But there ought to be real clear guidelines. And I think as long as we, and I think emphasizing, going back to the other item, which is the alleys, emphasizing those top 3 general community concerns, safety first, of course, and access to the residents. I think that was really a good move. We didn't talk about whether we're going to sort of drop or reduce the importance of the other items there. I don't want to go, I'm going back to it because we didn't really finish, I think, conclude on whether we're going to eliminate some of the other priority items there, because I think they can all be argued in different ways, but from a public interest, city interest, residents interest standpoint, I think you hit the nail on the head the first 3, 1, 2, and 3. As far as the lighting is concerned, I think these 4 now that we've reduced the one that has the ambiguity where people can really argue, without any real good evidence. I think we've done a job on that one. So that's why I wanted to go back to the other one, because I'm not sure we've done a job on the other one.
Okay, so while we're at it, I'm going to go ahead and ask us to go back to the one previous, because if we're going to make some changes, I got to make sure the city attorney gets it down. Do that.
So going back to sub-policy 616A, on the selection criteria for the alleys, I think is where the mayor's referring.
So there, I would just say that number 4, significant negative aesthetic impact. Probably every single alley, could be argued to fit within that. Every single unpaved. A paved alley in need of repair, as opposed to severe need, or some standard of severity that the 3 public officials can hang their hats
I got a question for you on that one, because I think you hit on something. A paved alley in need of severe repair, or a paved alley in need of repair. We're trying to pave alleys that are not paved at all.
Right.
I'm not sure why those 2 should even be in there, because that's not the issue. Hank's doing major maintenance, as we discussed earlier. He's doing major maintenance to an existing alley. We're trying to get the unpaved alleys paved, and this is the process we're hoping to get there. So what about if we just eliminated 7 and 8, because it's not dealing with establishment of priorities for alley paving, which is the policy.
Or the one, Mr. Mayor, if you don't mind me cutting in, I don't think we're looking far enough into the future. I mean, if we start taking too many of these things away in 20 years down the road, when we finally get these things finally paved, And then we're gonna have to start looking at, alleyways that are gonna have to, severe disrepair or just somewhat need repair. Instead of having to come back and revisit this as a policy, we should be looking at this at, 20 years down the road, councils, what are they gonna have to do in order to go through that?
I would think that they would become part of the regular street maintenance program. A paved alley would be treated, and maybe.
Well, what about-
How about
What
if,
about-
how about if we ask Mr. Levine up here for a minute? Because right now we have, whether we believe it or not, the majority of the alleys are paved.
Right.
And we do have that, so he has to have a program that he's maintaining that's already there, and he doesn't bring that back for one of these type of things.
But we also have, asphalt alleys in bad, or severe, that are in severe disrepair, correct?
This, as I understand it, is to specifically to the unpaved alleys, whether they're and so if they're asphalt now and disrepair, that's not what this is addressing. Once these alleys are paved to the standard that you want, then they will be entered into the street system and will be paid gas tax, transnet dollars for maintenance of that, and the maintenance of those will compete with the maintenance of our streets. So, if I'm not stepping on toes, I'm in concurrence with having 7 and 8 not on this list, because if we're going to maintain them as we would any street, and then we can bet you they would be ranked within the needs with any street once they're paved.
Okay, thank you. I mean, that's kind of what I was thinking. I know that, but you're thinking of the
I
future.
understand.
And we haven't had this policy before, so.
Yeah, well, what I was kind of thinking was, I'm thinking of the asphalt alleyways that I know are in, severe disrepair, and we haven't touched those yet either. So just kind of looking at that too, so.
I think that's a message well sent. While that may not be part of this policy, now that we know that that's part of our general repair and maintenance system, we should make sure we're doing that on the alleys as well.
Good point. I would just suggest that, because this is a big ticket item, and we still haven't fully addressed the question of private owner participation. The criteria for not requesting private owner participation are really the public interest criteria, the really strong public interest criteria, including safe and sanitary access to where it's the primary access to the individual homeowner. So I would say 1, 2, and 3 is where this program ought to focus on right now. And let's come back with a plan, see what that cost is. And once we've taken care of these urgent needs, we should then take a look at the aesthetic and other kinds of considerations with the remaining alleys. And by then, it may very well be the case that some of those homeowners will come forward, maybe more willing to share in the cost with them, with the city. So to me, because otherwise, if you look at the aesthetic criteria, you look at could improve the circulation pattern of a particular neighborhood, that's kind of vague, and it probably would apply to any alley that you could navigate up and down the alley.
So let me ask Mr. Hall and Mr. Levine there, if we took off everything after number 3, because we talked about that, does that give you enough selection criteria to go through the unpaved alleys and look at it and be able to whittle it down so that, I think what you were looking at and the way Mr. Hall put this together is, let's say everybody tied on the top 3, every alley, so then we can follow the number 4 and 5 to make the selection, because we don't have so much resources to do it this year. So I don't know if that's why they put it in. I might be putting words in his mouth, so.
Oh, we would do them all if they tied on the top 3, because those are the highest priorities.
We're not going to get past the top 3 for a long time.
Well, I think what the mayor's saying has and I think that's one of the things we're thinking. There's a lot of alleys that qualify for all the top 3. And we're not gonna have money to probably do all of the alleys that are even the top 3. So then where do you drop down? And the bottom line is, the ones that score highest on all 6 are the ones that would be the first ones that we would do essentially. But I agree, we're not gonna get through the first 3 in the reality.
So how about if we just drop for this, remember, these are our policies, the council policies. We can update them and see how they're working, because we haven't used them before. So how about if we just drop 7 and 8 on this particular setup, give the staff a chance to go through it? Because if it's not a workable system, then they'll have to monitor it. But this is all paper right now. We haven't evaluated alley versus alley, so. Please.
If I may ask, Mr. Hall, why did you include number 4? Obviously, there is some importance to it, so.
Boy, how should I answer this without getting in, the mayor and I have kind of an ongoing joke. He's named a couple of alleys after me. I think that there are some alleys. Yeah, but the one I don't like is paved. That's a good point. There are some alleys that can inhibit economic development and whatnot. And so number 4 is really in there, that if it is a safety hazard, and if it is if it is damaging infrastructure, and it's just unsightly and it's keeping people from otherwise coming in and investing in our community, I just want there to be some criteria to say, wow, if we got that alley paved, we might get people to be able to come in and invest and purchase that, an adjacent piece of property and build something. We just have a few of those in town.
Exactly, and Mr. Mayor, this is a topic I think that is near and dear to your heart. Anything that we can do to help improve property values, I think it should remain on the list.
So I'm listening to what we said. I mean, can we work with getting rid of just 7 and 8 on this set of at least revision A of this sub-policy, and maybe revision B we'll have to add or take something away? I don't know how it's gonna work yet.
So, yeah, we don't know how it's gonna work. All I was worried about is that we would have any one of these, if they're all equally weighted, any one of them would be arguably, the most important. So, to me, if we make sure that every alley that we do, that they have to meet the first, second, and third criteria, okay? And then amongst those, we'll see how many of the others apply, and then that would help determine the priority.
Good point.
That's all I'm saying, rather than jump down to 4 and say, hey, that's my alley right there. Exactly, block access or anything, but it's ugly.
Yeah, remember, we have to bring these projects back to the city council, and what we would do is we would show you how they're meeting each priority or whatnot. And my guess is if we brought in and said, well, we want to do this alley first because it improves circulation, you guys would say, wait a minute, that's a number 5 priority. What about the number 1? So you guys would still have the final say.
So we're, on this particular one, for Jennifer's benefit, we're dropping 7 and 8. Mr. Hall, you can move on now.
All right. Complete streets, we talked a little bit about that. That is to give us an opportunity to see if we can identify some grant funding. Moving to the next sub-policy, which is for sidewalks. One of the things that you asked us to add in your last meeting is to look at unfinished links of sidewalks and where we might want to put some additional sidewalks in the community. And so we created one other sub-policy for your consideration tonight, and that would be for identifying where we should put in sidewalks. And that would be locations where it's determined that it will significantly improve pedestrian safety and convenience, locations that will allow safe travel of children to a school facility, locations that will improve pedestrian access to a public facility, locations that will connect missing links of pedestrian facilities, locations linking to a commercial area, and on down to sidewalks that can be coordinated with other improvements such as street rehabilitation, and then sidewalks that are in disrepair and need to be replaced. I gotta tell you, they're almost all equally number 1 on sidewalks. The good news is we aren't missing a lot of sidewalk in the community. We've also prepared a map for that should the council want to see it. There aren't a lot of sidewalks missing, but there are certainly some key elements, some key segments of sidewalks that need to be filled in. One that comes to mind is there's no sidewalk on Delaware near what is going to be a new commercial development. So that might rise in priority because it meets several of these criteria. So again, we're very open to your suggestions on how to revise this policy. The criteria on sidewalks almost all weigh equally. It's a little harder on sidewalks because, boy, people need a safe place to walk, and we're trying to get those things. But again, luckily, we don't have a lot of missing sidewalks.
So I'm gonna ask number 7 be dropped because that has not something to do with installation of sidewalks, because it's trying to fix what we don't have. Because Mr. Levine uses different criteria to maintain sidewalks. If that's agreeable with my colleagues, then I think we try to establish that improving what we got. Mr. Earl, go ahead.
And then the last one that was suggested at your last meeting that you asked us to include, and I think that makes a lot of sense, is to update the big picture. There's been a document that we have used in guiding our economic development and other improvements in the community. What we want to do first is have the staff internally take a look at that, because a lot of those things can be taken off the list because they've been accomplished, and kind of see where we're at on that document. It may still be very viable. In fact, the few times I've looked at it, there's still a lot of viable stuff to that. We may not need to spend a lot of money to update it. We just may need to do it as a staff and get it updated. However, if we get going through there and we determine that we really do need to have a consultant take another look at it and do a major update, we'll bring that to the council for your consideration to determine that. But I think it still has some very valid information that we should be applying here.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, and Mr. City Manager, I think that I'm really happy to hear this. It's something I've been asking for a long time, and I think a lot of us, we need a big picture, a vision, a sense of where we want to go, and this is a great document. It was really thoroughly reviewed by the community in the year 2000 before it was adopted, and I would urge that we do an update and have more community forum to get community involvement in revalidating what our current community would like to see in terms of the future vision for IB. And so we should build into this that there's workshops or design charrettes or whatever we want to call, you know, and some way to incentivize people to participate so that we actually do get some good public participation. Also, it fits in with what we're trying to do with the 14th Street, sorry, the Palm Avenue.
I thought we had a new project.
No. Wouldn't even be in Imperial Beach. With the Palm Avenue master plan process, so that, because Palm Avenue commercial is a part of the big picture. And so there would be a good overlap there as well.
Should the city council need more information, we have loaded a few pictures for you on some of those projects, but essentially I think you get the concept. And tonight's meeting is really to seek approval of 3 sub-policies and then a resolution that authorizes the funding that we talked about tonight that has been tightened up quite a bit, but it allows us to get started on some of these projects and start to implement them between now and the end of the current 2-year budget cycle, which is June of 2015.
So because we have, and the staff has presented us as several resolutions with these policies, I'd like to take them all separately so that the city attorney can make sure that he's on top of it. So we'll do all the policy ones first. So the first one is Resolution 2014-7453, which is for policy 616A. I'd entertain a motion for that.
And
we modify, right?
Mayor, the modification is that under the selection criteria, items 7 and 8 will be removed.
Thank you. We have a motion? Second. Could we please vote?
Councilmember Bragg, please vote.
Again.
Motion carried unanimously.
Okay, the next resolution is 2014-7454 for policy 616B. And as modified?
Yes, the modification here is that under selection criteria, number 2, at the end of the sentence, there will be added on or other indications of safety conditions such as accidents. Number 3 will be deleted in its entirety. and number 4 and 5 will be renumbered to 3 and 4.
Entertain a motion. Motion and a second, which please vote on that.
Motion carried unanimously.
The third resolution dealing with policy is 2014-7455 for policy 616, Charlie.
And under selection criteria, number 7 will be removed.
Entertain a motion.
Second.
We have a motion and a second, could we please vote?
Motion carried unanimously.
And lastly, I'd like to entertain a motion for 2014-7459 that provides the funding allocations to initiate the projects for the 2-year implementation schedule. We have a motion and a second.
And there's some discussion after the motion.
I have to apologize. I have a public speaker slip here. I'll hold that for a minute. John Ballard, I do apologize. It's sitting here right in front of me. We've gone around in circles, but would you like to come up and say your piece?
Sure.
Still on the items,
Just real briefly, I saw it already in there, but I just wanted to make it kind of hit home and real for you. That one of our tenants actually called 911 when someone was shot down the street from our commercial area. So I just want to kind of bring it close to home and say that your first priority is high crime, and accident probably being second for fire accidents and such. Just, use a sheriff plotter, and where there's that block mark there, you check out why, it happened in that area, maybe that particular part of it was dark, but there's light area here, and, this area is fine, this area is not. So, but, on that close there, this makes sense.
Yeah, since this is a policy discussion, the mayor usually lets us answer, and wanted to let you know, in fact, I had the lieutenant ready to comment tonight. He has told me how important it is to have light in certain neighborhoods, and that does improve the safety. And he has very detailed information about where every accident is, where every violent crime is, and it's information we don't share, but it is information that will be used in that selection criteria.
Great.
Very good.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And that was it.
I
I'm sorry,
apologize for
John Ballard, 1018 Take Street, Privilege.
So I believe I was at the stage where we were looking at resolution 2014-7451. We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion?
Yeah,
Please.
I'm the one who wants to get out of here probably as much as anybody.
That's right, it's up for discussion, so.
The fund source issue, I think, I just wanted to
That's
make
right.
sure we were clear on, that would you clarify the fund sources?
Yeah, exactly. One of the things we wanted, that's why I was going to interrupt after motion in a second. I shouldn't do it until then. But I just wanted to let the council know that we have reassessed where we would be taking the funding from a couple of these projects, because we found some more, what we believe to be more appropriate funding sources. Certainly in the last meeting, the mayor made a very good point that we should be using our gas tax money when it's available. Because that's funding that can be replenished through that gas tax fund. And so we are suggesting, even though the resolution doesn't make specific where these allocations will come from, because again, it's from the general fund of the city, but you have categorized them. So we want to make clear that the $50,000 for the engineering for the alleyways would come from the gas tax money, which is a more appropriate source than the restricted capital project reserve. And then also that the $5,000 to develop the concept for the park would come from the money that you set aside for the park fund, rather than from the, where did we have it before? The capital project reserve. Yeah, so we wanted to make those clarifications because those are more appropriate funding sources. And so it doesn't change your resolution, but it does change the information that we presented to you at your last meeting, at the comments that were made by the mayor and Councilman Spriggs at the last meeting.
Do you have any other thoughts on that? So once again, we have a motion and a second on the table. Would you please vote?
Motion carried unanimously.
Thank you. We are now moving on to the Imperial Beach Redevelopment Agency Successor Agency Reports, item 6.1, Mr. Brown. Mr. Hall.
Mayor and Council.
All down.
Hey, Mayor and Council, if you'll take off your Mayor and Council hats and put on your Director hats, and so we'll call you now Board of Directors, I think Mr. Wade would like to walk through with you something that's becoming all too familiar, because it seems like we're doing this all the time, even though, believe me, it's only every 6 months, but it seems like all the time. And that is our next submission of our recognized obligation payment schedule. Mr. Wade.
Thank you, Manager Hall, Director Hall, and Mayor, members of the successor agency.
See, he got it wrong.
Before you tonight are 4 separate items, all of which that deal in part with our recognized obligation payment schedule for the next 6-month period. That period would begin July 1st, 2014 and extend to December 31st, 2014. The first item before you is a resolution, successor agency resolution 14-38, and essentially what this will do is reallocate unexpended redevelopment property tax trust fund monies received in the last 2 ROPS periods that we are proposing to hold during this ROPS period as a reserve for both our bond debt payments in the next 6-month period. So what this chart is attempting to show is the ROPS periods. There were 6 items, 3 in each, the 1314A, which was from July to December of 2013, and the 1314B, which is the current 6-month period from January to June. The DOF, Department of Finance, approved reserves for both the 2003 and 2010 bonds in their entire amount from during the approval of the ROPS 1314A. Those reserves were going to be used during this current period to pay our June 2014 bond payments. What you may remember, however, is that in December of last year, we refunded the 2003 bonds. Part of the reason we did that was to save money, not only to the successor agency, but to all the affected taxing entities. Meaning we decreased our bond payment, we increased the amount of property tax that goes to the city and all other taxing entities. So in effect, this $1,028,000 bond payment that would have been due on the 2003 bonds is now only going to be $388,644 on the new refunded 2013 bonds. That saves an amount of $640,143. We are proposing to put that into our bond reserve for payment in the next period. There we've listed the 2010 bonds. That payment stays the same. We've been fully funded for that for this period, so there would be no excess. We also received $49,657 for litigation expenses related to a lawsuit filed by Affordable Housing Advocates of San Diego County. We only incurred legal expenses of $23,390, leaving $26,267 of unexpended and approved bond of RPTTF. Those 2 we propose to reallocate to our bond debt reserve. And then related to the bond refunding in 2013 during the last period, we had 3 items that were approved in this current period. They were the First Southwest non-contingent fees in the event the bonds were not refunded, we would have to pay them $19,000. And for the Fraser and Associates, our fiscal consultant, we would have had to pay them $25,500 if the bonds weren't refunded. We also put on this current ROPS $50,000 for successor agency costs for refunding those bonds. As you know, the bonds were successfully refunded. And though we were approved for these amounts to the 2 consultants, we didn't need to pay them because they were paid out of bond proceeds. So those 2 amounts carry over, and we want to also propose that they be set aside into our bond debt reserve and used for bond payments in the next period. Of the $50,000 that we were paid for successor agency costs of issuance, we actually incurred slightly over that in costs of $53,394. Therefore, although we were paid from debt reserve, we were given $50,000 in this current period to pay that,
turns out we don't need $46,006. So our proposal is to reallocate $756,000, $916,000, sorry. Let me say that again, $756,916 to bond debt reserves. Part of that would pay the entire bond debt reserve for the now refunded bonds, the 2013 bonds. The payment in December will be $395,231. We'll pay all of that. Our proposal is to use the remainder, $361,685, to pay a portion of the $520,553 payment due in December. Therefore, for bond debt reserves on the ROPS, which you'll be seeing later on in this presentation or of the agenda items, we're only going to be requesting $158,868 to service bond debt in the next 6-month period. That results in savings, again, just reallocating those funds. We don't have to request for those funds in this next ROPS period, and we actually save money. And we believe that the Department of Finance should approve that reallocation. So we're asking for your approval of this resolution and recommendation to the Oversight Board that they do the same.
So, starting off on our first item for the successor agency, do we have any questions for Mr. Wade on this item? Mr. Spriggs?
Mr. Wade, actually, I've missed your presentations on the ROPS. It's been quite a while, you know. This use of bond funds for expenses other than bond debt retirement, and then having some surplus from those other non-debt retirement uses go into a debt retirement reserve. Is that, I mean, it's a slightly different use, and is it kosher?
In answer to your question, it's a slightly different use, but the pot of money is all the same. In other words, we're using redevelopment property tax trust fund money that's gathered up by the county and then distributed to successor agencies for obligations that are approved by the Department of Finance. Bond debt reserves have been approved. All the items on the previous slide have been approved. What we have is unexpended RPTTF monies. Reallocating them to bond debt reserves is not is allowable as long as the Department of Finance approves that. So there's nothing untowards about doing this. We've got the money on hand. It's in our retirement obligation fund. And so all we're proposing to do is, rather than be taken away from our next distribution, we're just going to reallocate this. So as long as it's approved by the Department of Finance, there's not a problem with doing this.
It seems to make a lot of sense. Thanks.
Any other questions for Mr. Wade on this item? I think that what I take right off the bat is that the efforts that Mr. Wade and the legal folks and everybody to refinance those 2003 bonds especially has made a big difference. And that, you know, it helps the city because, as you know, the leftovers from all of this rolls back into city funds, school district funds, a little bit for those guys, but, and, you know, the county and everybody else. So I think that they did a really good job of getting out in front of it. And I think that's helped us when we've gone to talk to the Department of Finance about other items, because they see we're doing what they thought they intended to do. I don't think they really knew what they were doing, but you know, I think we've really actually done better for them than we needed to. We didn't need to take that extra effort. So we have before us for this item is a resolution SA 1438, approving and recommending that the Oversight Board approves these numbers. Do we have a motion? A second. Do we have any further discussion? Please vote.
Motion carried unanimously.
We'll go ahead and move on to item 6.2, Mr. Hall.
Mr. Wade?
Thank you. The next item on the agenda is approval of a resolution that would separately and independently ask for repayment of the city loan made to the former redevelopment agency, the outstanding balance of which is currently $3,738,100. You may recall that we approved and placed that loan repayment on our prior ROPS. The Department of Finance, however, and the objective there was to get it approved as an enforceable obligation simply because that agreement between the city and the former agency was entered into within 2 years of the adoption or assemblage of the redevelopment agency back in 96 rather. The DOF disagreed with that and said, however, because we've been issued our finding of completion, which was issued April 12th of 2013, we now can place this loan repayment on a ROPS beginning in ROPS 1415A, and if you're keeping score at home, they're now named by the fiscal year, and the 6-month period for the first half of the fiscal year is A, 1415A, and for the second half is B, 1415B. We're looking at the 1415A. Beginning with that ROPS, we can put this loan repayment on the ROPS as long as the Oversight Board makes a finding that the loan was for legitimate redevelopment purposes. The original agreement made that finding, and you may even recall that back in September when you approved the previous ROPS, we made that finding. The Department of Finance is not accepting that. They are asking for a standalone resolution that makes that finding to be sent to them and approved by them prior to approving this loan repayment on a ROPS. We may get into a little bit of a timing issue. We're not sure if that's their objective. I'll get into a little bit of that later, but the loan has been placed, and it has to also be subject to a loan repayment calculation that's in the Dissolution Act. And what that calculation provides is that from the base year, which is fiscal year 12-13, as you may know, when you have all these obligations that are paid for by the trust fund, if there's any left over, that's called residual redevelopment property tax trust fund, that amount is the base year of distribution to the affected taxing entity. Our base year, there was $0 of residual because every dollar that was distributed to our agency had to go to pay for enforceable obligations. The difference between the base year and the next year, which is the current year we're in, the difference in the residual value, up to 50% of that difference can be reimbursed per fiscal year to the city as a loan repayment. Because this current distribution was $2.2 million, $2,230,430 to be exact. Half of that, again, because the difference is half, 50% of the difference is that minus 0 is $2,230,430. Half of that is $1,115,000 something. Thank you. That is the amount, the maximum amount we can request in a fiscal year. We've put that entire amount on the ROPS, which you'll be seeing later, as a first repayment to the city of that loan. We're asking you to adopt this resolution and recommend that the Oversight Board adopt the resolution to make the finding that this loan was for legitimate redevelopment purposes, which it was. It essentially provided seed money to facilitate a fledgling redevelopment agency, to adopt its plans, to proceed with capital projects, to carry out activities of the redevelopment agency. Those findings are in the resolution, and when we get to the ROPS, you'll be approving as among the items on the ROPS repayment of this loan. My speculation is that because that amount is a fiscal year, we may see the DOF come back and say, well, we'll give you half of that for the 6-month period. The other concern I have is that because the DOF, as recently as 2 weeks ago, distributed an email saying that this resolution had to be done separately and independently and approved by the DOF prior to them approving a loan, we may have them say, well, we haven't approved your ROPS. We're going to approve that first before we look at this resolution. So we're not sure if that's going to happen. Just in the abundance of caution, as soon as this resolution, if in fact it is approved by the Oversight Board, we're going to send it first, right away, and wait till the deadline to submit the ROPS, which is March 3rd, to submit the ROPS, and hopefully they'll have begun review of that resolution and have it reviewed and approved. I get my pessimism, I think, from our special counsel who's dealt with many other agencies that have had a much harder go with the DOF than we have. So she's built up a lack of trust, shall we say. I'm not sure if that's what they're after, but I just wanted to caution the successor agency that despite the fact that we're seeking repayment on this ROPS, there are a couple reasons that it may not happen, at least on this ROPS, but we're hopeful that by the time we get to next year, we'll be getting repayment. If they approve the entire amount, we could see full repayment of this loan to the city within just over 3 years.
So I have a question for you. You're questionable about whether our timing is quite right. So if we miss it on this cycle, they have approved paying the loan back. It will just come in a later cycle, is what you're saying.
They have not approved the loan repayment yet. They've directed us with the approval of the last ROPS that it may be approved as an enforceable obligation pursuant to this finding by the oversight board, by the successor agency, and pursuant to the calculation formula. They actually have a calculation formula on their website. I went to it, I inserted the numbers we have, and came up with the number that we came up with. That's the good news. They still have yet to review and approve the agreement, but based on what we provided them, the documentation, there's no reason to believe they wouldn't approve it unless legislation changes by the time they actually do have to approve it, which is not, unforeseeable. I mean, there's nothing that I'm aware of that is afoot to do that. But if they don't approve it on this ROPS, claiming that they hadn't had a chance to approve this resolution, and we put it on the next ROPS, who knows?
That's 6 months out then, right?
That would be another 6 months out.
So the legislature could in 6 months put out some.
Right, and our next ROPS for the following period would be due October 1st of 2014.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Spriggs? Oh, Ms. Bragg?
Thank you. Mr. Wade, when are you taking this to the oversight board?
A week from today, February 26th, 10:30 in the morning, here in the council chamber.
Thank you.
Mr. Spriggs?
So, just to make sure I understand, when redevelopment agency was formed, in, what year was that?
1996.
And then the loan was made at about that time.
May, it was formed. June, the agreement was executed.
Because the bonds still had to be issued to generate the revenue for the redevelopment
Yeah,
agency to operate.
There was no way we could bond until we started generating enough tax increment, and it wasn't until 2004 that we issued bonds.
So the redevelopment agency effectively could not operate without the loan.
That's correct. And it's not uncommon. Almost every city that formed a redevelopment agency provided that agency with loans and seed money, and almost every agency is seeking repayment of those loans, some of which did or did not, were or were not executed within 2 years of the formation of the agency. We just happened to do it a month later, knowing they're going to need money because they didn't have any.
So you think there should be no issue whether this was a legitimate loan for legitimate redevelopment purposes, because there was really no other way the agency could operate under the law to do anything.
That's correct. And when we submitted this on the last ROPS, we provided the documentation, the resolutions adopting the agency or setting up the agency, the resolutions approving and the agreement, copies of the agreement. And in their determination, they didn't question the validity of that agreement. They simply said that what happened under that loan agreement is over time, the city would make loans to the agency incrementally. And at one point, the city was repaid most of the balance, and then the city made an additional loan, 2 additional loans that totaled the current balance. The DOF essentially said, well, the loan wasn't made within 2 years of formation, although that's not what the Dissolution Act says. The Dissolution Act is clear that the agreement must have been entered into within 2 years. They're interpreting the actual provision of funding as the determining factor. So they didn't question the validity of the loan or the agreement. They simply said because of the timing of the monies, it can't be approved simply outright, out of hand as an enforceable obligation. So you have to go to the other section of the Dissolution Act under which it can be repaid with this formula. And that doesn't even make any mention of when the agreement was entered into, when the monies were provided. It simply says that they can be repaid pursuant to this calculation.
So the original agreement had the $3 million in it, or was that amended up?
That was amended up in about 2003.
I see. Okay. Thank you very much.
So you're looking for adoption of resolution SA 1439 finding and recommending to the oversight board that this item here for the 3.7 million. Entertain a motion to adopt that resolution. We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion?
I just wanted to state that there was a last minute agenda item for anybody who reads these staff reports. I put the wrong executive summary in the staff report. I'm sure you guys all noticed that and thought this isn't the right executive summary, but that's what the last minute agenda item.
We thought it was typical gibberish around these things.
It all looks the same after a while.
So we have a motion and a second on the floor. Can we please vote?
Motion carried unanimously.
Before we move on, I think that this loan repayment, I mean, I know when we saw the dissolution of the redevelopment agencies coming forward with the way that Sacramento put it, we were not expecting to be able to get this the way they had written it. It looked like they targeted Imperial Beach almost. I think Mr. Wade, and he mentioned the outside counsel, they've done a fantastic job of conveying why we believe it should have been an enforceable obligation. So I'm knocking on wood on this one. I think there's at least several other cities in San Diego County are watching to see how this works, because there could be one of the first that does that. So congratulations, Mr. Wade, if you can get that one through.
Yeah.
Moving on to item 6.3.
Should I just take it? Thank you, Mr. Hall. This is similar to the ROPS. Every 6-month period, we have to adopt the successor agency and administrative budget. The administrative budget for a city or an agency of our size is capped at $250,000 a year. We have a budget here totaling $125,000 for the 6-month period. This is also the subject of a last-minute agenda item. If you notice on the last page of the resolution, we had carried over the same, essentially the same type of administrative budget. One thing we've changed is that the successor agency's audit costs, although they were rejected on meet and confer with the DOF, they've been approved to be paid for separately from the trust fund, so we've taken those out. So and that's been corrected in the resolution we send up. We'll have the audit costs removed from the administrative budget. We're looking for approval of SA 1440.
Do we have any questions for Mr. Wade on this item? Entertain a motion to approve SA 1440. We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Could we please vote?
Mayor Janney, please vote.
Get a new screen.
Motion carried unanimously.
Thank you. Moving on to item 6.4, Mr. Wade.
Thank you. This is sort of the meat and potatoes of all the actions you're taking. This is the actual recognized obligation payment schedule. I won't bore you with everything that's in it. As I mentioned, the city loan repayment of $1.1 million is in there, and even with that amount, the total amount of trust fund money we're requesting for the upcoming 6-month period is $1,555,714. Just for reference, and last year the amount available was about $3.265 million. So what that means is there's going to be a sizable chunk of residual RPTTF to go to the city and back to the other affected taxing entities, the school districts, the county and whatnot. So that's good news. And that's if they approve the entire $1.1 million of city loan repayment. One thing I'd like to mention is that just about a week ago, there's been a recent legislation. It's AB 471, and it was approved unanimously at both the Assembly and the state legislature, 35-0 and 75-0. That would make if our housing entity, our successor housing entity, is the housing authority, which in our city it is. Our housing authority operates as the successor housing entity for the purposes of redevelopment dissolution. We can separately list on a ROPS administrative costs associated with the housing agency. It was, as I mentioned, was approved unanimously. It's sitting on the governor's desk. He has until February 24th to either approve it or veto it. If he does nothing, it will become law. If he vetoes it, it would go back to the legislature and it can pass on a 2/3 override vote. Given that it was unanimous, there's a chance that it may happen. So what I'd like to do in approval of this ROPS is have your authority modify if needed, the resolution to suggest that, and I've already done this for the Oversight Board ROPS, is to add that item on. The maximum, by the way, in the legislation is you can get 1% of your RORF or a cap of 150,000. We'd be at 150,000. Whether or not we'll need that much, we probably won't, but I put that amount in the next ROPS, the one going to the Oversight Board, simply as a placeholder. We should know by the time the Oversight Board takes action whether or not this is law. So I'd like your authority to include it, and if it does get approved as law, we will then have it on the ROPS to be approved by the Oversight Board. I will say that we are getting ready to do quite a bit of work with Habitat for Humanities to effectuate that land deal and the project. And while it likely won't cost $150,000, it certainly will assist us in our staff costs that deal with doing that project. So that's something that I would like to amend the recommendation to include on this ROPS. Not that we add it, but in the event the governor.
So I'm going to ask Jennifer how we do that. Do you want us to just give direction to staff to do that, or do you want to amend the resolution?
Direction to staff, I think, would be fine.
Allow staff to include it on the ROPS that goes to the Oversight Board for approval next week.
Okay, then I entertain a motion to adopt resolution SA 1441 and direct staff to include that on the ROPS going to the Oversight Board. And do we have any further discussion before we go?
Can we make sure that the minutes reflect the amendment or the contingency?
Yes, and just for the record, the amount I identified as $1,555,714. If we do include it and it is approved, we'd be requesting $1,705,714 of redevelopment property tax trust fund in the next period.
Thank you. So we have a motion and a second on the floor. Could we please vote?
Motion carried unanimously.
And before we adjourn, to our school board member out there, you got some money tonight from the city of Imperial Beach. Good effort. That gentleman right there saved us all money, but he got you some money too.
Okay, I owe him lunch.
Meeting adjourned.